Hey guys. I this week I was assigned to discuss the topic of the Inter-American Human Rights System, which I honestly did not know anything about prior to this week, and so the last week of readings have been definitely very insightful, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit about what I have learned. So, the Inter-American Human Rights System is an pretty much an international institution regionally that monitors and protects human rights. It's been described as a set of norms and bodies that govern global or govern regional cooperation in the Americas, so the Inter-American Human Rights System, to strengthen implementations of international obligations when we're talking about human rights. The Inter-American Human Rights System is rooted in the American Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, which was the first designed to promote shared human rights. The system overall has been an integral part of the regional institutional arena and in the Americas since the mid 20th century. Something that I've gathered that I'll address again later is that the Inter-American Human Rights System is just a powerful way for victims to, have their voices heard when they've exhausted all other options. So the system serves as a preventative mechanism in line with the responsibility to protect that we read about this week in relation to atrocities such as crimes against humanity. They call out all human rights violations so that they don't escalate to that level of violations. The Inter-American Human Rights System is composed of two autonomous organs, one of which being the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is based in Washington, D.C. The commission monitors human rights within the region. It was created in 1959 to promote the observance and defense of human rights. The commission includes 7 different commissioners, of whom are human rights experts, and they're nominated by their home countries and then elected to the General Assembly. All of the 7 commissioners serve part-time for 4-year terms. The commission is divided into regional and language groups, and their secretariat processes all of the petitions, the correspondence, and communications within this body or within this organ of the Inter-American Human Rights System. The commission primarily acts as an arbitrator and adjudicator of cases in which discrete human rights violations, accusations are made against individuals or group, and it serves as a forum for grievances or issues that are not ready yet for adjudication. At this point, they investigate and see what they find. They use their influence to promote human rights issues in their member states. They can accept petitions against member states from individuals and their families, and when they accept them, they explain their decision in reports and make recommendations for remedy. The remedies may include payment to fix the damage, a public apology, an investigation, or the commission also may suggest policy or law changes. These responses to the petitions when they found a violation are called precautionary measures. Again, something else I gathered was that this entire system serves as a preventative mechanism. I thought it was important to note that they cannot decide individual guilt, and that the commission is the only international forum where individuals or NGOs acting on behalf of individuals may bring human rights complaints against the United States and have those complaints adjudicated by a decision-making body. The other part, so that was one major organ of the Inter-American Human Rights System. The other major organ is the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, and that is based in California. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights was created in 1979 as an autonomous judicial institution of the OAS. And we will get to the OAS in just a minute because they've created this entire system for us. The court section is composed of 7 judges and is in charge of applying and interpreting the principal human rights treaty within the region. They have 2 roles, which is one is contentious and one is the advisory section. They have jurisdiction over states that have ratified the convention and the optional protocol, which we've read about this week. I thought it was interesting to note that the United States has not ratified either one of those, and so the court cannot hear cases against the United States. The court receives cases by submission from the commission that we just talked about. The jurisdiction of the court can be exercised with regard to any provision dealing with the protection of human rights or an international treaty within the Americas, because again, this is a regional institution. Certain governments have tried to limit the powers of the court, and I've got a couple of notes that I wanted to hit about the challenges that the entire inter-American human rights system is currently facing, one of which is that certain governments are trying to, shut them down. So the court section is open to any person affected, their families, third parties. It's an individual system, and the individual component is a really strong mechanism of the court, and it really serves to protect communities from violations of human rights. So I wanted to, kind of circle back to the OAS that I mentioned earlier. So the Organization of American States created the Inter-American Human Rights System and was founded in 1948 and is made up of the 35 independent nations of the Americas. It is the world's oldest regional organization, and the OAS Charter is the text that this organization is based on. It includes the charter includes, basic human rights principles, including representative democracy, human rights, equality, economic rights, and the right to an education. The second text that it's based on is the OAS Declaration, which covers more rights such as Social Security, healthcare, leisure time, and more rights. Wait a second. I lost my train of thought. Leisure time and property rights, such as Social Security, protecting the rights to property, yes. So the OAS Charter, the Declaration, and the Commission Statute regulates and establishes human rights standards for all of its members within the Americas. In this section, I thought it was important to note that the Declaration does not include an obligations clause to require states to take measures to protect rights. The United States is legally bound by the provisions of the Declaration. However, I learned that the Convention and other treaties are binding only to those that have ratified them, which is becoming increasingly less shocking. The United States has not ratified them. To talk a little bit about how this system works, so qualified petitioners can turn to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights for relief if they've exhausted all domestic legal remedies. Again, these are really powerful places for victims to kind of have their day in court, which was something that was noted by our readings, because once they get to this point, they've often been denied, their day in court and domestic proceedings. Winning a case before the commission has far-reaching domestic and international implications and can cause other regional bodies like the United Nations to take notice. And so because it has such a far reach in the international community, advocates often use the Inter-American Human Rights System to advance their causes, their human rights concerns and causes. So through the commission, advocates can request investigations are conducted, seek precautionary hearings, for example, and then I'll get to this a little later on, but they can use, the attention that they get from putting a petition forward for community organizing and bringing more awareness to their cause. I thought it was interesting that the United States government is ultimately answerable to the commission for not complying with their declaration. I thought it was also something to note because it reminded me of the ICC that we talked about last week, that the Inter-American Human Rights System is not a site for first relief for individual complaints, but kind of as a last resort. So when all other bodies fail to respond domestically, that's when the Inter-American Human Rights System, it's a mouthful, provides pressure on the U.S. for these individuals. So it's kind of a last resort thing, but it provides people with another option when they've exhausted everything else. The Commission does not consider petitions alleging private misconduct, only petitions of violations by the federal government or of its agents. Also read that individuals or groups can submit petitions on their own behalf or on the behalf of other parties, and that these parties don't have to give their consent or even know that someone's, submitting a petition on their behalf. We talked about the contentious arm of the commission, and so if a contentious case is brought before the Inter-American Commission, it proceeds in two phases. The first phase would be the admissibility phase, where a panel of the commissioners we talked about earlier decide whether a petitioner has met the requirements and if the petition has jurisdiction to move forward. If it does have jurisdiction to move forward, the petition is registered and transmitted to the state that has been accused, and at that point, the state has 2 months to give a response. The second phase of a contentious case before the commission is the merits phase, and this phase is where they determine whether a human rights violation actually took place. They consider all of the evidence, they hold hearings, they conduct further investigation, and throughout this phase, the commission encourages friendly settlement between parties to try to seek an agreement. And as mentioned earlier, they may make recommendations as well. If the commission deems that a state has been responsible for human rights violations, they issue recommendations of remedies that we talked about earlier, try to reach a friendly settlement that will make the victim whole, which is one of their goals here, and then create legal and policy reforms to, again, prevent this violation from happening again. A couple of challenges that I wanted to mention was that I mentioned one earlier, so we'll just lead in from there. So the system faces many of the same challenges that they did 6 decades ago, which it's underfunded, so states underfund the system, which threatens its very existence, and then some leaders within the Americas reject the system entirely, which again, we saw that with the international courts. And then they also noted that political elites sometimes withdraw when they disagree with the direction that the Inter-American human rights system has taken. I also wanted to note a couple of reasons why it was important to go back over what I mentioned earlier. The court's opinions within the Inter-American human rights system can be a powerful tool for a larger advocacy strategy, because again, advocates can incorporate the Inter-American human rights system, these norms and the jurisprudence into local, state, and federal advocacy. There's an example that I wanted to use with poverty lawyers. They mentioned that poverty lawyers can use the commission strategically for impact purposes and to hold state actors accountable on both the international and the domestic stage, to urge policy changes from legislators, creating new ways to mobilize, community organizing, and to build further coalitions. Like I mentioned earlier, it seems to be a really powerful tool for communities to have their voices heard, and the Inter-American human rights system addresses human rights concerns when those concerns fail to be addressed domestically. So pretty important. But yeah, that is what I learned on the Inter-American human rights system this week. I'm excited to hear your all's opinion, and hopefully we can chat about your thoughts on the system. So thank you.